Hello, beautiful human. I'm Zach. That is Dan. And we welcome to the studio today, for the first time ever, the frontman of a legendary Chicago punk band, here to talk about their brand new album, Ricochet. Why are you laughing?
Tightened up.
I was like, when you said legendary, I was like, all right, okay, I'm going to sit up straighter.
I'm not bullshit.
I appreciate the adjective.
We say hello to Tim from Rise Again.
Yo.
Yeah.
Tim McIlrath. Did I say your name right?
No, but that's okay. Nobody does.
Dude, it's very Chicago. It's very Irish.
It's it's very Scots-Irish. I was just in Ireland, which we don't play very often. So I went and did like the genealogy thing to like figure out just how Irish I am. And I only had time to pick my dad's side because my mom's maiden name is McWayne.
Well,
So I have my choice of like which road I want to go down. One day I'll go down the McWayne road as well. And yeah, it's very, very Scots-Irish. The lady told me at least that my relatives, my ancestors, whatever, would have come over like in the mid 1850s, like which would have been indicative of like a potato famine, just looking for like, better jobs, better life, or whatever.
that is, the one thing that we can never forget is that this country has been around for a very, 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 very long time.
Right.
Still, in some cases, a baby compared to other countries, but still a very long time.
Oh yeah.
I think about like in just comparison, think about a place just randomly like Australia. Giant migration happens there, and like as recently as the 60s. Like,
Right.
Totally different situation.
Totally. Yeah.
That's crazy.
Yeah, it's a long time. And like, I don't know if genealogy is something that you get into when you get older, because I never cared about it before, but it made me think about just like, oh wow. Like I even found like a picture of the boat that the first McIlrath and my side would have come over, and just thinking about like, wow, like to be here this many years later, like sitting in your studio, like playing in this band, like I don't doubt anybody who was coming over here with just probably like a bag of their belongings and $1 to their name ever would have thought that somebody down the line, would be like in a position like I am. And it makes me think about, what's the future, of my progeny, you know what I mean? Like what's going to happen 100 years from now,
I'm going to do this. That's like, because it gives you really a new depth of perspective and new understanding of exactly what you just said. Like the roots that are laid here and like understanding exactly where you came from and what that person came with to turn it into something like this.
Right.
That's crazy.
And it makes you realize, like there are quotes from the less desirable humans on our planet that say things like they're not sending our best. You know what I mean? Like and isn't it the opposite? Aren't they sending us their most ambitious?
Right.
They're the people that dream the hardest, that will risk the most to find a better situation. Isn't it the actual opposite of that? Like it is the best,
Anybody willing to risk everything in life to achieve something better, who has that bravery, has that strength, has that determination, has that focus and persistence, that is somebody that makes anywhere that they land a better place.
I can't even put myself in those shoes of like tomorrow someone's saying, you have to leave here and we're taking your wallet and your credit cards and we're going to send you somewhere where you don't know a single person, And also there's no phones or Wi-Fi or anything like that. And you're going to start over. Like that's scary as shit, right?
Well, it is happening all over this country.
Happening all over. And you hear so many amazing stories of people doing that. And I'm sure we are all products of that story in some way, shape, or form.
It's the right transition into this album because Ricochet is the brand new one. Society's going through a lot, obviously. And for as long as your band has been around, you have taken on the burden of essentially internalizing and interpreting things that we go to as a collective and adding a really different tone and perspective to it. That allows for a different understanding and the ability to reach people that maybe wouldn't have those conversations previous.
Yeah, that's a good way of putting it.
This album, though, is made before what we're in today.
Yeah.
And you still carry the burden that society's going through. It's woven throughout the album. But would the album be much different today? If you were writing it today?
That's a great question. And here's my answer is I think Rise Against as an artistic endeavor, as this band, we are a musical equivalent of dystopian art in some way, shape, or form. You know what I mean? Like the same way 1984 is a dystopian book, or Fahrenheit 451, or Brave New World. So when we think of what is dystopian culture? What is dystopian art? Well, it's an artist looking at the way things are in that moment and then taking it to its nth degree, taking it to its logical conclusion. Like the things that we're going through right now, maybe they don't seem so significant or bad, but I want to paint you a picture of what it could look like if we kept going down this road, right? So like 1984 was not the reality when George Orwell wrote it. They didn't have Newspeak and a Ministry of Truth and, all these things. But he was saying, if we keep making some of the same decisions that we're making today and letting them slide, then this is a perfectly plausible scenario that we could end up in by the year 1984, right? And so I think of Rise Against as like, we're sort of doing the same things. We're just singing about like the decisions we're making today and then painting a picture in song of like, this is what the world might look like. And so to do that and then to write a record a year to go, 2 years ago, whatever, and then to have that world start to materialize, that's sort of, almost less surprising because it's like, you don't want to be right. You would hope to be wrong, you know what I mean? But like, we're singing about the beginnings of that road and then also like what that world could look like. And here we are in some way, shape, sometimes, yeah.
Was that art form or that like, I don't know what to call it. Like, I mean, you're doing a certain type of artistry. Like, has it been like that since the unraveling, or does that form over time?
It's something that I didn't realize until probably like much more recently. Because I think that the art I was doing was far more subconscious. It was just spewing out my instincts, onto the pen and paper and the music or whatever. And I'm really bad at like self-reflection. I'm more just good at like just moving on and just the next thing and trying to just worry about what's happening right in front of me. But when in the moments that I do self-reflect or reflect on Rise Against, I realize, oh yeah, we're so much like the musical equivalent of a book like 1984. You know what I mean? Like, and I think maybe that was an influence that came to me as a young person, and so when asked to write songs, I think that was a little more in my DNA. And just to take it to a whole nother level too, like if people are familiar with 1984 and George Orwell, it's this, this dystopian novel that's talking about politics of the future, but there's also a love story intertwined in the whole thing that's so important to the story, and that's kind of what Rise Against is as well, because we are not just 100% talking about the ills of society. There are songs about love and loss in our records. And in some ways, like, those are some of the songs that a lot of the audience has identified with the most,
Some of those songs that come to mind. I mean, because like there is like, even if you look at Ricochet, or if you take a look at the album, like, do you appeal to reason? Right? Like, is there love woven throughout that record? I mean, yes.
Yeah, in fact, so it's from song to song, right? Like, so Appeal to Reason that kicks off with a re-education through labor, like named after like Chinese prison camps, and then it's talking about not bowing to any sort of pressure or power.
Are you surprised that that's one of your most popular songs still?
Yeah, I think I got a kick out of the fact of putting this song title out there on like, things like CDs and albums and streaming services. I love that when I love playing the song and saying what it's called, you know what I mean? Like being able to like sort of put a point on like, listen to those words, like re-education through labor. And yet we live on a planet where that's considered like a legitimate form of punishment, Anyway, I digress. But on that same record would have been or will be our most popular song, Savior,
yeah,
which is a love song. That's a love and loss song. It has nothing to do with prison camps and re-educating and politics. That is someone going through love and loss, and that would go on to be Rise Against's most popular song, which would actually, it was funny because I was listening to the Goo Goo Dolls. You guys just had them in here. Yeah. I'm a huge fan, by the way.
I love them too.
And you pointed out something that I think was so important to point out. It was like their 5th album.
Yeah.
I want to say before they really had their biggest songs. And Appeal was our 5th album as well.
In 2008, you've been making music since 2001.
Right. And we'll never reach the stratospheric levels of the amazing Goo Goo Dolls. But for us, that was, we are a story of a band that was allowed to grow over many records and allow us to be the band that would then create a song like Savior that would then connect with a lot of people.
But didn't you say that Savior was your least favorite song on that record going into it, and you didn't even want to put it on the album?
Yeah, you've done your research. So it's 100% true, actually. So I don't know what it was. I don't know. I think that sometimes the artist is too close to the project, And so Savior was not a song I was thinking about a lot on that record, which when I look back, it's probably a good thing because sometimes the most important art you do is the art that you don't spend too much time thinking about. You just put it out there, and that's kind of the thing that people respond to. I was laboring over other songs, and I wasn't really laboring over that song. That one just kind of just came out. I think maybe I attached the labor to the importance. You know what I mean? Because I was laboring over this, because I was putting more work into these songs, that must mean these songs are more important. Kind of forgetting about this one that wasn't that laborious, So
when you say work, right, is that getting it perfect? Is that getting the lyrics just right? Is it sonics? Like, what is that?
All those things, you know what I mean? When you hear the song back and you're like, there's something not right about this. And it might be the tempo, too fast, too slow. It might be like a lyric that's just cringy to me, or just like, oh no, I don't want to say that. You know what I mean? It might be something the way the guys respond to it. They're like, this is cool, but this always feels unnatural when we go from this part to this part, So sometimes you have to massage the songs, and sometimes you don't. Sometimes it's like obvious to everyone in the room. It's probably like you guys, you come up with a good idea, and you see everyone's body language in the room when they're like, that's a great idea. You know what I mean? It didn't require a lot of labor and effort.
But did Savior get that idea, that reaction?
I don't think it did. I think it came out and it was like, yeah, this is a good song. You know what I mean? Like, but it wasn't like, I'll tell you, we wrote that record, and the song Re-Education, that was the first thing that us and the label, even before we went into the studio, they were like, that's your song. That's our single, Re-Education Through Labor. And to the point where we actually finished the song first before we even continue the rest of the record in order to deliver it to them so they could be ready and do whatever they have to do with it. And so we're like, okay, it's Re-Education. That's like our jam on this record. And then the second single on that record, which is escaping me at the time, but it was not Savior. We then spent time on that song, and by the way, now the record, at this point, the record is out. We're touring it. We're playing around the world. We're not playing Savior on stage. And in fact, we spent the entire Appeal to Reason touring campaign never playing Savior.
What?
Hold on.
So it was like,
What?
it was more or less like a deep cut on our record that wasn't, even after it was out, it wasn't totally like changing lives. You know what I mean?
But a hit record is like a tennis ball underwater. It will always make its way to the top.
So that's what happened. And so
How does it get there?
as we were wrapping up our touring for that record, the label was like, okay, let's, by the time you get to a third single, like resources are dwindling. You know what I mean? Like enthusiasm is dwindling. They're already moving on to like other projects. You know what I mean? This project they've been working on is now a year or two old. And we have no future touring plans, so they know that we're not going to be out at radio stations like really supporting it. So your third single is really where the least amount of resources get put into. It's like, not to call it a throwaway, but like, it's just the way the business works, right? And so they're like, okay, listen, you guys are wrapping up this record. We had a great campaign. Re-Education Through Labor went well. I think the song Hero of War, which is more of an international like hit, and there was one other one on there.
Audience of One was
Audience
the
of
second.
One, maybe. Okay, thank you. Was the second single. We put a lot of effort and resources into that. Like, as you guys are like walking away from this record and closing the door on it before you begin your next chapter, let's put the song Savior out. I think it's on the track listing. It might be, this is the last song on the record, or is it like it's somewhere? It might even be like way down there.
Savior's 11.
Okay, yeah, so it's way down there. It's way down there. And we're like, yeah, let's do it. That sounds good, And they put it out as a single and sort of serviced it to radio as we were like walking in our doors with our suitcases, like ready to wrap up the record. And then just being home and getting the emails and the phone calls like, hey, this thing is like starting to get some legs. And we're like, oh, well, that's cool. And then like, no, it's like really getting legs. We're like, oh, well, we already toured the record. Like, yeah, but like people are loving this song. And then we spent the next like 6 to 8 months already thinking about our next record, watching radio take off with this song while we were mostly home because we'd already toured the world like twice at that point on that record. And then, so we came back to the next record with a whole different number of fans, I guess.
How does that record though influence what you make immediately next because you're writing it while you're watching this thing, and
Yeah.
it being a record that is, not necessarily about something that is going on in society, but maybe more personally driven.
So that element was always part of Rise Against, even from like the first records, So I think that for us, it was a surprise, but it wasn't a total shock because we were writing songs, like even like Audience of One, you know what I mean? Like there were songs that had nothing to do with the politics, you know what I mean? And we allowed ourselves to break outside of those guidelines of like, this doesn't need to be like, maybe like a Rage Against the Machine kind of band where it's like, this is 100% politics all the time, And even that would be a stretch because there are some songs that are like sort of personal and rage. But like, we allowed ourselves to just write what we wanted to write. You know what I mean? Like even with a song like Swing Life Away was just kind of like an acoustic ballad, you know what I mean, about friendship and, that kind of thing. And it was outside of what the layman might think of what Rise Against is, And because I think we threw those curveballs early on, it gave us permission to be whatever band we wanted to be. And then even though maybe like the press would grab onto like the name Rise Against, I mean, we named our band Rise Against. So like, you know what I mean? Like we're sort of in some ways defining ourselves just out the gate with like a t-shirt and like whatever. But I think for people who know who we are and our fans, there's layers beyond that, you know what I mean? And Savior was or is one of those layers.
When you look back, are you happy that that's a record that you're defined by?
Yeah. Yes. I love that record.
It's timeless.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Yeah. I love that record. At that point, we had made it in the same studio we had made our previous 3 records, I want to say.
I got to say, you have a crazy record deal. I didn't even know they did record deals like this back then. I mean, didn't you have like an 8 or 9 record deal with DreamWorks and you did most of them in one studio?
We
or
had
7? Was it 7?
It was a 5-record deal. But we did all 5 of those records and walked away, on friendly terms from the label. All of them recouping.
That's an all-in-one studio.
Except for the very first one, I want to say. The other 4 were all done at a studio called The Blasting Room in Fort Collins, Colorado, an hour north of Denver, in an old furniture warehouse with our hero and legend, Bill Stevenson, from the band Black Flag and the Descendants.
It's so fascinating. Like there was rumor that like you'd even have to turn in demos to get approval. Is that real?
That's real.
They were just that artist friendly. They believed in whatever you were doing.
So yes, I mean it was either artist friendly or they kind of forgot about us.
Sick for you though.
It was sick for us. I don't know how to like impress upon people because I'm not even sure that this is believable or plausible. But like, yeah, like we all those records you hear, like anything you've heard on the radio, like that's what we turned in as a final product.
That's amazing.
We never went through like a submission process. Nobody ever messed with it. We spent their money on records with our friends making the records, which was a studio that wasn't making a lot of stuff that was being played on the radio. So that was already, just to even get into that studio was like, we'd been allowed to do that. You know what I mean? It was a huge thing. And then, yeah, like giving them our final product and then having those final products be successful and compete with other things on the radio. And also, by the way, like, we live in an era where a lot of artists like are working with different songwriters. Like we never worked outside of our band.
And you would work with the same producer, like producing duo, right? Or no, Bill Stevenson of the Descendants, Black Flag, you said, but then Jason
Livermore.
Yeah, they were together with you for 6 of the 10 albums.
Yes.
Part of the 2017 thing, Wolves.
Yeah, they weren't part of Wolves or Siren Song or our debut album, The Unraveling. And those are the only 3 they weren't a part of. But everything else, and pretty much if people have heard Rise Against on the radio, it was Blasting Room.
So why now with Ricochet do you say, you know what, guys, we had a good run. Let's try something else.
I think that every record, we felt like a little bit of pressure to go with a different production team. You know what I mean? Like, hey, mix it up, But we were a very like elbows up, like punk and hardcore band from Chicago that got signed to DreamWorks in our early years. We're skeptical of the entire entertainment industry. You know what I mean? We're 4 guys who never like moved to LA after we got signed. You know what I mean? We all still live in our hometowns, And then we decided that we were going to like really protect what we were doing. We had a great manager named Missy Worth who like protected us from the label system as well. And we were able to do things so successfully on our own that we finally got to a world where I no longer feared it. You know what I mean? I think we made our point. We proved it, you know? And so that was when we were more open to the idea of like working with like a different team. Cause I knew that there was things that internally we were probably never going to change. We're just kind of congealed in the band that we are. But like a production standpoint, we could have like different eyes or different ears laid on what we were doing. And so that was kind of inspiration behind that.
The right amount of involvement.
Yeah.
It's so fascinating that you guys stayed in your hometowns.
Mm-hmm.
Do you credit that with a part of the reason why you've been able to, one, stay together, continue to tour, but also for your success?
I think so. I think that there's something about Rise Against that is very like Midwest. You know what I mean? It's very like, let's make music. Let's be known for our songs. Let's avoid the pitfalls that a lot of our peers have fallen into.
That's great.
You know what I mean? And it's sort of, my life was crazy enough. You know what I mean? Like I've been jet setting around the world for like 25 years. It was great to have like a place to call home, a home base. You know what I mean? And like, and walk away from the band in like almost like an airlock type situation where it's like, okay, now I'm just this dude from this town. You know what I mean? Where nobody really, my neighbors don't really know what I do or don't really care. You know what I mean? And there's different ecosystems. Hollywood is one of those places where it's like, I wasn't ready to like jump into that. You know, I never felt the urge to do it.
But that allows you to make music in the most unfiltered, like for lack of a better word, untainted by like whatever this shit is.
Yeah.
Way, right? Like you can make music that is still grounded and pure and connected to what drew you to it to begin with.
Yeah. And I think like, by the way, I think there's great benefits to being in a place like LA, being like a creative culture that it is, rubbing elbows with people that create for a living, you know? And those are like the plus sides of it. And I think those plus sides are awesome. And the downsides are maybe like the competitiveness of it, you know? And so like Rise Against, we've never had that sort of competitive bone in what we were doing. We were never, we were just making things in a vacuum in a way. And so we weren't trying to compete with anybody or like, wasn't trying to make a better song or a better record or a bigger tour than you know what I mean? We were just kind of in our own world. And then we had a great team here in LA that was just fighting for us.
How healthy and very rare. Most people are focused on everybody else except for themselves. But the people who waste time doing that are the ones that end up failing.
Yeah, and I think it will be hard to avoid that and not just be more susceptible to it. You know, even if you say you aren't, like it would probably be kind of tricky. So I'm sure probably we missed out on some things by not like relocating to LA the second we signed to DreamWorks in 2004. But there are some benefits to it as well. And I guess just still being here this many years later, whereas like a lot of our peers aren't, you know what I mean? There must have been something in the water, I guess.
It's the energy in the streets, man.
There you go.
How'd you end up with Katherine Marks?
Via our friends in Manchester Orchestra and our label Loma Vista, you know, they had so many good things to say about her. And so when we were considering who was going to produce this next record, which is a big decision, she sort of like was just one of these names that kept popping up. And what I liked about her was that she was largely unfamiliar with Rise Against. She didn't come to it with any like baggage, you know what I mean, of what we were supposed to sound like or what we've done, you know what I mean?
It's great.
And so she wasn't beholden to like, you know, any idea of what we were supposed to sound like, you know, and I think that might be, somebody might consider that a con. I thought of it as an asset, you know, so she brought that to the table. Rise Against is like our story is like, our story behind the scenes is largely a female-driven project. So like you see 4 guys on stage, but like the majority of our team behind the scenes have been female since our inception. Like at one point it was just all 100% female. And I'm talking like my lawyer, my accountant, my manager, you know, my domestic booking agent, my international booking agent, just like everybody, you know? And so I think it was like, it almost felt like really natural to be like, oh yeah, well, we should be putting a woman behind the steering wheel here for this record too.
What is it like working with Katherine?
Amazing. She's amazing. People might know her from the Manchester Orchestra records, but also she did the boygenius record and won a Grammy for that, which was awesome. She's done St. Vincent.
I hear there's a wall of dreams, her whiteboard in the studio.
Yes. Yeah. Her wall of dreams. Exactly. Yeah. That's her. What is this record going to be? What do we want? Her inspiration, like that kind of thing. Like, let's go big, I remember at one point she wrote like, let's put a power drill on this record. And then before we left there, we put a power drill on the record. It had to happen.
You can see that's texture. That's reality. That's fucking cool.
She was far more like vibe, like I think that when we made records previously, there are times where we would put too many things under the microscope. And we were at risk of like really sterilizing the music in a way. Because now with technology, especially, you can make everything perfect if you want. You know what I mean? Like you can do it. And but then there's some argument to be like, but should it be perfect? Were Rolling Stones records perfect? You know what I mean? Like, no, they have a little vibe to them. And so that's been a little push and pull in my band. And Katherine was like far less like under the microscope and far more like the energy and what does it feel like, And so she was grabbing like live takes, and we were like, no, like don't grab that. I don't know if it was good. And she was like, who cares? Let's do it. It felt good, And so that's kind of, this record has that kind of vibe.
Different to create in 2025 than it is, I don't know, in the year 2008 or whatever.
Yeah. The technology changes so fast.
Technology, are the people different?
People different? Well, you're talking to a guy who made 6 records with the same production team.
So yeah, totally. Yeah, fair.
I don't know if I can speak to it, but yeah. So, but by staying in this studio for 6 records, when we finally jumped out of it, yes, like the world, it was like, Katherine is using a different toolbox. You know what I mean? And almost any producer you meet, is using, like they've all come up in different ways. And especially in this era of people becoming producers, growing up in the era of MacBooks and GarageBand and Logic and Pro Tools, where it's all more accessible than it was like in like the, say, 90s when like our producers were growing up and when studios were like a state-of-the-art thing. They still are, but like inaccessible. Yeah. You know what I mean? Like far harder to get into. And now you have a lot of like self-taught like DIY like producers. And so you'll meet somebody half your age who's like, dude, I can do this, this, and this, like so quickly, or like this thing you've been doing in like the cave with your dinosaur friends. You know what I mean?
It's real though.
It's real, and honestly, I think I was resistant to it. I'm a little bit of a Luddite, in that way. I was like, no, has to be done this way. And then the more people I meet, the more I see like their toolbox, and I'm like, oh shit, that's cool. And I just see it all as like tools for creativity. But it took me this long to get there. By the way, like this is a new me in that way.
But like a part of me understands that. Like if it ain't fucking broken, like why would you fix it?
That's kind of how I've always felt too. Like I just think we're still reaching for things in the same way we've always reached for them. We're not out of ideas yet. Like why? I'm not looking for more. Like I've got plenty to play with here.
But it is like there is a way to meet that with the right amount of new and fresh where it doesn't compromise. It only complements.
Totally. And that's kind of how I felt on this, going into this 10th record. Just saying that out loud, this is your 10th album. You know what I mean? I think the numbers never register with me. It always took somebody else to tell me what album I was on, or someone else tell me what year my band is on. You know what I mean? Like I never noticed those things. But for something about 10, like all of a sudden I was like, oh shit, like 10? Like we're making our 10th record. And so with that, I think came a little bit of like, all right, we've proved our point. We've done our thing in our own protected way. Like maybe we venture outside and like meet with a songwriter that's outside of our band. You know what I mean? Which is far more common these days than it is not. You know what I mean? But to us, it was a huge leap because in 25 years, we'd never done that.
Wait, what is that? What is that like?
It was crazy. Like, you know what I mean? There's moments where like you feel like you're doing something wrong. You know what I mean? It's like, I can't be sitting with you. You're not in my band. You know what I mean? We can't be putting ideas together, And then it's like, and then you're worried that your thing isn't going to be you also. It's like, well, if I let this, will this water down like who we are, And then you hear the finished product and you're like, oh yeah, like it can't not be me. It's always going to be me. You know what I mean? It's always going to be us. We're always going to add our DNA to it. We're just going to be inspired in different ways by somebody who came into music through a different door than we did.
Do you ever ask yourself 10 albums in like, do we have like what else do we have to talk about, or is there always things that you can find?
Well, luckily, there's a lot of low-hanging fruit in the political world today for a band like Rise Against.
Sadly, the world's gone to shit.
Yeah.
So like, you got nothing but inspiration.
Totally, yeah. I always think like we're a band trying to like put ourselves out of business. You know what I mean? Like if the world was all happy, you know.
Great.
I don't know if you guys know like Sea Shepherd and Whale Wars and like that whole thing, but like they were trying to end whaling. You know what I mean? Like commercial whaling around the planet, and they had a TV show about it and all these things. But in the end, they realized like if we actually do end it, like we're out of business. You know what I mean? So
And that's okay.
But they were admitting like that's what we want. We want to be out of business. We want to be not in this business of chasing Japanese fishing ships doing illegal whaling. And so in some ways, if the day is beautiful and sunny, you don't need the lighthouse that is Rise Against. But when it's dark, you might find us.
Mm-hmm.
And by the way, the darkness comes to everybody at different times. And, your music takes on multiple meanings depending on what's going on. It's not...
Right. And the things that we deal with are timeless. You know what I mean?
Totally.
Like the current White House, this is not a new character in history. I mean, we've seen this character. We've learned about these characters, like people who traffic in totalitarianism and dictatorship and that kind of thing. These are just some of the rules coming from the same playbooks that we've all seen in anybody who has looked at history. It's happened before. And so if you're singing about these things, they kind of can be evergreen. And it's also like living in today's political climate reminds you like nothing is settled. Just because you won this fight 20 years ago doesn't mean you can walk away from the front line and assume that front line will still be there. Someone's always trying to push back against every well-won fight, and that's gender, race, sexuality, inequality, all of these things,
Is any of what we're experiencing today, at least from a performance standpoint and an art standpoint, similar to any other time in history that you were performing and making art through? Because you guys, you were crafting art post 9/11.
Yeah. Those were sort of the flames in which Rise Against was born in. I feel like there was no grand plan for Rise Against, you know what I mean? There was no wall of dreams, you know what I mean? Like we didn't have like a dry erase board that said like, here's our career, 25 years. We were just kids from Chicago just making music. And so your band is sort of finding its identity, you're carving it out in a really natural and organic way. And so we were doing a lot of different things in like 2000, 2001, and then the war in Iraq and 9/11 all was happening in that time, and you got to see a lot of ugly sides of your country, some pretty sides of your country. You saw the world react to these things, and I think that sort of sharpened the blade of Rise Against a little bit, and it gave us a little bit of direction, and we grew into our name the way that you fill a huge pair of shoes. We started like living up to what we called our band, but I think that would carry over for the rest of our career, because I remember in a post 9/11 America, it was, I think we think of like things like the war in Iraq. It's I don't know if it's largely accepted that this was a huge mistake now, but it seems like it is more accepted as a mistake now than it was then. At the time, it was very controversial to be against the war in Iraq. We get shit thrown at us for saying something on stage. They did not want you singing about this or talking about this. It was a very very patriotic fervor that was happening in the States. And any critique of it was considered treasonous, you know what I mean? And so what we were doing was being very confrontational at the time.
But what I find really interesting is like everybody of a few different generations during that time, they were all shaped in very different ways. This is just how you all were shaped forever. But totally. I can make the case that every generation was shaped forever. The world would change forever off of that. Post-Columbine society, post 9/11 society. There's a lot of stuff going on.
Absolutely. And we were lucky because I think we came from a punk and hardcore world that were talking about a lot of progressive issues in a way that music not always was, I was a young person, but the first time I heard the word sweatshop was at a punk show, not at a classroom. You know what I mean? The first time I heard concepts of environmentalism was at a punk and hardcore show, not in a classroom, And so my mind was being blown, you know what I mean? I stopped eating meat 30 years ago after learning at punk shows what the inside of a slaughterhouse looks like and be like, oh man, that suffering seems awful. You know what I mean? And someone telling me actually, you don't need to eat any of that stuff. And I was like, oh, well then I won't, And so this was a secondary education that I was getting.
So do you feel obligated in that moment to supply a secondary education to others when they need it the most?
In short, yes. I think I knew because I was, like most people are, you are in the crowd before you were on the stage.
Totally.
And I felt such gratitude towards the person with the microphone that was showing me these things that were life-changing. You know what I mean? Like, I decided to be straight edge back then, still am today. You know what I mean? Like, I don't drink, I don't do drugs, all those things. That came to me from a stage. You know what I mean? It came to me from a song, from music. So I think I knew deep down that if I ever had the chance to be on that stage, I would need to honor that responsibility to pass that message to the next generation the same way it was passed to me.
How did those conversations happen with your own kids? Just sit them down and play them a record.
Yeah, right.
I mean, you could.
It's funny because I have 2 daughters and they're 16 and 20.
They're like in it.
They're in it. Yeah, they're that. In some ways, the ship has sailed. You know what I mean? Like they are adults.
No, it's like partially like still like it's like half sailed and like half still like attached to you. Yeah,
you're right. I think like a classroom would call it emerging adult. And that's what they are. So like, it's sort of like I joke with my 20-year-old because like there's some things when I talk to her or text her about things like she's like, Dad, I'm an adult now. Like you can't even say that to me anymore. Like I can't. But then when she wants to be a kid again, she's like, Dad, I need this. So she has the luxury of pivoting back and forth or like, wait, what does that make me? Like, I'm like part-time your father, but then other times like just your peer. What's going on?
Yeah, when it's convenient for her.
Totally, yes, which I'm sure is normal. I'm sure I did the same thing. You know what I mean? My girls, okay, so the apple fell far from the tree. They're into like hip hop and pop, and one's at a sorority, you know what I mean? Like partying her way through Arizona State University, you know what I mean? Like it's those things like they found their own path, which I think at first like kind of bummed me out. I was like, I thought I'd raise cool kids who were like into the Ramones, you know what I mean? And I think I did try to brainwash them at one point, you know what I mean? And when they were young, I was, we were doing all of our records on the major labels, spending a lot of time here in LA, jumping around to, studios. And someone would be like, "Oh, you have kids. Like, check out the new pop act of the day. Here's the Justin Bieber CD. Here's the Taylor Swift CD. Whatever it is. You know what I mean?" And I remember thinking, like, "No, this is contraband. You know what I mean? Like, they can't have this. You know what I mean?" And I would take those CDs home and like put them on a high shelf. Like, my kids are gonna be cool and they're gonna be into like the Descendants and Black Flag and Minor Threat. And this high shelf that I was putting all these pop CDs on would get bigger and bigger, right? And at some point I realized, like, as I'm driving them around on the way to school, blasting the Ramones, and they're not responding to it, you know what I mean? Something else was happening that I did not anticipate that was sadder than all of my possible outcomes, was that your kids aren't getting into rock music or punk music, which is like sad in its own way, but you're actually doing them such a disservice. They're not getting into music. And that to me was a far worse outcome. Like, you're not allowing them just to be their own thing. You know what I mean? And listen to their own thing. And that's like, I went to that high shelf and I was like, here's your thing. You know what I mean? And then they've loved Justin Bieber and Taylor Swift. I've been to all those concerts with them, whatever. And they became big music heads, just their own thing. So I love that they're passionate, music heads. Like, my daughter will go see The Weeknd tomorrow night. You know what I mean? Like, cool. And then my other daughter came back from the Charlie XCX concert, like losing her fucking mind. You know what I mean? And then what they do too is they teach me about this stuff too, because it's in my house, so I learn a lot about, music that I might not normally be introduced to.
Are they vegan? Are they straight edge?
No, they're definitely not straight edge. And then they don't eat meat though, which it kind of was like,
that's cool.
Yeah, like I think, it's funny because I think about it in the same way in my house. So I was probably like 16, 17 when I told my parents, I was like, I don't want to eat meat anymore. And they were kind of like, okay, like, we're not going to really accommodate that. Like, you're allowed to do whatever you want, but, we eat meat in this house. So, let's figure it out. Yeah. My parents will become actually far more vegetarian, like, later in life. But I think about the same thing as my kids. Like, listen, you can do whatever you want, but we're vegetarian in this house. You know what I mean? Like, we're not eating meat in this house. You're allowed to do whatever you want, And I always tell them that. And I try to remind them that too as they get older. Because it's not that I don't care, but I really want it to be their decision. And so, but so far they're both staunch vegetarians. Was it important for you to find a partner that was also vegetarian? Yeah. I've actually known my wife since we were in high school. So like, that's we cool. Sort of it was never, I never considered my life might be different. You know what I mean? Like I was never on a dating pool in like my 30s trying to find like, vegetarian, blah, 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 So we just kind of grew up together and, we were just two kids that didn't eat meat.
I was a vegetarian for a long time, and it was the person I started dating that like got me off of it.
So I find that with a lot of friends.
It's
you know what I mean?
real.
A lot of friends that, and I could see that absolutely being real.
And
You know
like
what I
you
mean?
move in with them, and then you're
Mhm.
combining stuff, and then they
think-
don't like it. It's like a fucking.
I think that's such a common phenomenon. I have a lot of friends who I grew up with, vegetarian or even vegan, and then they find a spouse, who's eating meat, and then eventually they're like, oh, I'll eat a little fish. Or like, yeah, okay, I'll eat the meat, which that's someone you love, that's your partner, you know what I mean? Like, you probably can't help but be influenced by that.
Totally, and it throws you off, man.
Yeah.
I mean, I think about that with you. You've been vegetarian for like 15 years.
Oh, really?
15 years now. I'm never going back.
I mean, I don't see myself going back either.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, I don't, yeah. Like, I have no desire. Like,
Yeah, me neither.
that's what something like, especially being straight edge too. I meet a lot of people that it may come up like, oh, you're straight edge, you don't drink. And it might be like, oh, good for you. I don't know how you do that. Or that's like, they maybe even use like, you're disciplined. And I'm like, no, I'm not fighting a desire to do it.
Mhm.
You know what I mean? I'm not fighting a desire to eat meat.
Yeah,
you know what I
there's
mean?
no interest there.
Yeah, yeah. In fact, like, I think to be a healthy human, you should always be considering it.
Mm.
You know what I mean? And like, don't be this thing because you feel obligated to be this thing. Because I told a podcast I was vegetarian, so I probably should be vegetarian. You know what I mean? Or I told him I was straight edge, so it's like you have a lot of pressure now on you to stay straight edge. You know what I mean? No, you should always be reevaluating that. You know what I mean? You should always be asking yourself, like, you can do anything you want. You can change tomorrow. You can change this afternoon. You know what I mean? You should allow yourself to do that. You should never feel corralled into this personality. And even thinking about that, it's not something I like. I'm seeking after.
Did going back to school during COVID change your life at all?
Yeah, it was really helpful to be in like an academic setting while our world was going through total chaos. Because it was kind of like a great like deep breath back to the nuts and bolts of like society and like getting information that was like unskewed in a lot of ways. Like I think like we live in an information age and a disinformation age, and we don't trust sources or whatever. I think it's easy to forget that like if you're in a college or university, like the stuff that you're consuming, it's like peer-reviewed things. It's something that's like 7 different experts had to all approve before it got to your table. You know what I mean? And so it was such a comforting thing to like be going through with like teachers talking about, because I was in philosophy and sociology. I ended up getting a degree in interdisciplinary studies, which was a degree essentially designed to allow anybody to sort of like partake from the buffet of academia instead of focusing on one thing. Because I knew I wasn't coming out of when I came out of this, I'm like, I'm just going to go back to singing for a band. You know what I mean? So I'm not looking for a specific degree to put on a resume. You know what I mean? And I was really just interested in like the learning aspect of it. I was also interested in ticking that box because school was something I never finished. The band kind of kidnapped me, and then I was something I said I would always come back to. But yes, it was.
Is that real? Like you really you said from the very beginning you'd come back to it?
I think that, yes, I did. I told my mom that at least. Because she was very like, are you going to finish this school after this band thing? And I was like, Mom, band or school will always be there. You know what I mean? But this band is like maybe a once in a lifetime opportunity. And we had just been signed to Fat Records, independent label out of San Francisco, with Fat Mike from NoFX. It was a big deal. My parents were worried. You know what I mean? Like everybody in my family has a college degree. You know what I mean? So I would have been like the first one not to have a college degree in like a long, long time. So like they were, I'd be worried too. Like now that I have a 20-year-old, you know what I mean? If she was jumping into something that I didn't understand, you know what I mean?
What would you do if your daughter came to you and said, I'm going to leave school to join a rock band or be in a rock band in the year 2025?
Oh my God. I'd be like, that's a terrible idea.
Yeah, right? In the year 2025, it kind of is.
It's hard. It's hard. And if the world had not changed since we started the band, I would be like, cool, I got a lot of advice for you. Like, make these flyers at Kinko's, pass them out at the skate shop. I know a place that will duplicate cassettes for really cheap. You know what I mean? We'll get them out there. We'll send them to these fanzines. We'll get in your van. Like, we'll send letters to venues.
Fanzine.
Like, yeah, exactly. Like, I would have had a lot of advice. And I've been excited for her. And now my advice comes from a time capsule, right? So like I would have no idea how to navigate the world, But someone I I was buying a suitcase just last week, like because actually if you want to know, I was like, it's a suitcase I've had and it's the wheels busted on it. And I
Oh
was
shit!
like,
So you got to fix.
so I went back to the place because they had a warranty, and I was like, I love this suitcase. I'd like to keep traveling with it, you know. And if you guys travel, like you have like your thing that you love.
Yes.
So, and the kid recognized me, and so we were talking about it, and he was like, I was thinking about starting a band. And I was like, kind of like what you just said, like, what if your daughter said this or whatever, and my advice isn't, you know, up to date. But I immediately said, like, yes, like, do it. Because I didn't start my band in a careerist way. I didn't start it in a, like, even seeing an outcome that involved any sort of success at all. I started because I had all these things that I wanted to express, and all I needed to do was get into my basement with my friends and just make music and express them. And that was good enough. That was like my goal of the day, was like, see if we can all play the same things at the same time, roughly in the same key, and get through 3 minutes of a song. You know what I mean? And those moments back when I was 15 are just as rewarding as when I will go on stage at the Rock im Park Festival in Germany in 2 weeks from now in front of 80,000 people. Like, they will be equally rewarding to me. And so, like, I'm not telling this kid to start a band because I think that there's stardom in his future. I don't know anything about this kid that's trying to fix my luggage, you know? But I was like, it will be rewarding no matter what. You'll be hanging out with your friends, you'll be making music, and you will always look back on it, whether it lasts like 2 weeks or 2 years, whether it comes with success or not. It's such a cool and fun and communal thing to do.
That's real.
But why do you think Rise Against, just like Papa Roach, who you're touring with, why do you think you guys continue to get bigger and bigger and bigger?
That I don't know. I'm sure there's like a lot of theories out there. I'm surprised because I went to the Punk Rock Museum in Las Vegas, and there was a Warped Tour exhibit, you know?
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah, and we spent years on the Warped Tour. Warped Tour is a big part of our story. You know, and we'll do the Long Beach thing this summer as well on Warped Tour. And they had all these old show lineups, you know, from the 40 bands that played that day. And they happened to have the one from Chicago, which I remembered. But I'm looking at a list of 40 bands from the year 2004. And like, I remember almost all of them. And then I'm looking at the ones that are still left, the ones of us that are still left. And I realized it's like not that many.
Very few.
Yeah, very few. And it was a moment for me to look at that list and see that picture and be like, wow, like, we're still here. Why us? Why isn't everybody else still here?
Do you have an answer?
No, I don't. I think that some of it can be attributed to your own effort and hard work for sure. You know what I mean? Like, you have to have that, you know? Some of it is just the way the wind blows. You know what I mean? Like, I look at all those bands on that list. They were all great bands. Mm-hmm. Like, a lot of them were good people. You know what I mean? And almost all of them were hard workers. They wouldn't have been on the 2004 Warped Tour if they weren't, you know? But sometimes just the way the wind blows, you know what I mean? Right. Those are things that are out of your control.
Ricochet. Mm-hmm. Why was that name right for this collection of songs?
So it started with a song called Ricochet, and then the word ricochet, which I just kind of loved in and of itself. And I started to think more about the word, and I started to think about how it is kind of trafficking in these concepts of how connected we all are, you know? Like, here we are, the four of us in this room, right? You know? I want to make sure there were more of us. So there's someone behind the couch.
There's somebody behind you the whole time.
I wouldn't be surprised. I mean, you've been on a video set. Like, there's like somebody that's like, oh no, he's been hanging out in the ceiling the whole time with a camera zoomed in on your nose.
No, just Carlos.
Like, I can pretend in like an isolationist way that I am here by myself and my actions are mine and mine alone, and the outcome of those actions will only affect me, and I want nothing to do with like you three, right? But you know, if like I start doing something here in this room, like weird, it affects all of us. You know what I mean? Like, we're all in this together. We have a responsibility to like keep this room operating, you know what I mean? To keep it moving forward, to push the rock up the hill. We're in it together, you know what I mean? If I start doing something, you start doing something, like, it creates a chain reaction. And that's kind of where like the idea of like ricochet came from. If I start throwing something around this room, like, I can't predict where it's going to end up. You know what I mean? I could be doing damage. You know what I mean? And then now take yourself outside of this room and now put yourself in the whole city of Los Angeles. You know what I mean? Like, we're connected to everybody in LA. And then that room is also global. We're connected everywhere. Like, the rights of an undocumented immigrant in 2025 are connected to your rights as well, whether you are or not. It's a connection that is ignored at our peril, you know?
People don't see that. Like with all due respect, like it starts with people who are seen as easy targets, and then it's everybody else's rights that are just as much in jeopardy.
Totally. And people confuse what it is to like rebel, and like, especially as a band that has thrown the word revolution out a lot in the last 25 years, you know, people confuse what that word means. Like, I come from a punk rock world and a hardcore world where it's like we are against rules and we are against like anybody telling us what to do. But I'm not against a stoplight. You know what I mean? But someone could argue that stoplight is taking your freedom away from you wanting to just drive, you know?
No, but you can also make the case that stoplight is protecting one's freedom because it allows me to continue living.
Exactly. So those are the things that we have to remember. Like, we are citizens. You know what I mean? Like, I stop at that stoplight for you so you can go through. And like, even though it's against my best interest, I'd like to get to where I'm going. You know what I mean? I don't want to wait there.
And also, like, you have freedom to not follow the stoplight.
Right. Yeah.
Whether that chooses that kills somebody or you get a ticket or whatever. Like, nobody's stopping you from doing that.
Right. So we're confusing these things where it's like stopping at a stoplight is not impeding on your rights to be who you are. You know what I mean? It's asking you to live with other human beings and cohabitate this planet. You know what I mean? And coexist. And it's okay because at some point you're going to get there and it's going to be a green light. And what a green light means is that someone is stopping for you. And we do this, we coexist. And we live in a world where I think that people are more isolated and they don't think they have to stop at the stoplight. Or they think that stopping at a stoplight is bowing down to the man. You know what I mean? And it's gotten out of hand because it's not bowing down to the man.
By the way, bowing down to the man, allowing one person to be above them, like that's like people like they need a hierarchy.
Right.
Do you get what I'm saying? Like,
totally.
People strive to be greater than another person.
This is true too. Yes, this has to do with privilege,
and
it's the way we mess with science now and talking about things like vaccines. You know what I mean? Like, we're doing things to protect each other. You know what I mean? You don't live in a vacuum. You know what I mean? And that's kind of where Ricochet came from. Like, if you start fucking with the room and throwing things around the room, like, outcomes that you can't predict will happen.
Sink Like a Stone. That song is about prioritizing somebody's mental health before you can help others.
Yeah.
At least that's my interpretation.
You're dead on. It's the classic, when you get on the airplane, the flight attendant tells you, please secure your mask.
Totally.
Before you help somebody else, you know? And that's kind of what that song is.
Is that born out of your own experience or observing others?
Oh, yeah. Like, I think, you know, singing for a band, I mean, you're all of a sudden communicating with a lot of people who are asking a lot of you. You know what I mean? And so you have to protect yourself from those asks and those demands as of like an artist. I remember early on in the band, and we're from the early 2000s, so like this is like probably still all had AOL and like dial-up internet, but we had like our website had like an email address so you could get to us. You know what I mean? And as the band got bigger, this was the way we communicated. There was no social media, right? So like we actually had physical fan mail back then. You know what I mean? We had like a P.O. box in Chicago where you could we would grab the letters and read them in the van, like on the way, like literal fan letters.
But that, like, the physicality of that and the tangible,
totally,
it's special.
It is special. I wish I would have saved more of them because they really are. Because you really see like someone's handwriting, like maybe they've doodled the type of paper they use.
You get to know someone.
You see the return address. You know what I mean? You don't see that on like a Yahoo email address. You know what I mean? Like, and so I remember that like that was how we knew we were affecting people because there was no comment section. You know what I mean? Like the letter you got was 3 months old. You know what I mean? And it was talking about a show that you played in Sacramento or whatever. Anyway, I forgot what I was saying.
There's like a piece in that though. Like this idea that you can get off stage and like not have to be inundated with reaction or comments or
so true
feedback and like and like you receive it months later when it's like you're separated from it. It's a different perspective. It's
exactly that's what made the early days.
It's so healthy
and healthy. Yeah, like it was like it made it so like when we ventured out in our van and even come out to the West Coast for the first time, we didn't know if anybody was going to come to see our shows. You know what I mean? Like you weren't getting ticket count reports from these little DIY venues, you know what I mean, or whatever it was. And so it was a legitimate surprise. I feel like now somebody would have all the data and analytics to be like, tell you exactly what to expect.
And by the way, like in doing that, like maybe make you afraid to make a move that could ultimately change your your trajectory.
And that's true too, because you would start, as a human, you would start responding to like comments and like critics and that kind of thing. Instead, we were allowed to just kind of grow in our own world. But like a lot of those letters and emails, it was a lot of people, it was heavy. It was heavy shit. You know what I mean? I think a lot of artists go through this, but it's like people that are like, that have found your song and maybe they were going through a hard time, maybe they were suicidal, maybe they lost somebody close to them. You're reading like all this stuff and it's like, kind of like we were talking about before, it's like emotionally taxing, you know what I mean? You're so grateful that your song found somebody, but it's also like people want you to be like the therapist and like the person that helps them and like you feel this insane pressure on you, and I feel like I had to deal with that, you know what I mean? Like I remember getting emails that said like, because at some point you can't respond to all of them, right? Like that point passed, right? When we first started, it was like, let's try to get to everybody. And that point passed. At one point I get an email that says like, it's somebody I can see that's emailed me like 50 times in a row. And the last one says like, if you don't respond to this, I'm going to kill myself. And then like, what do you do with that? You know what I mean? Like, how do you
just wait? Yeah.
Like, how does that weigh on you? What's your responsibility? And then like, how many of those emails can you take?
It's hard, right?
It's very hard.
And by the way, like things like that become more normal as social media becomes more widely used and just internet communication becomes more widely used to the point where like, like, I don't know, it's like, it's complicated.
Totally. No one prepares you for that. You know what I mean? Like, people, I was not prepared to be in a band, being a musician, to be on a stage, any of those things. Those are things that you just figure out. You know what I mean? I didn't go to like a school that taught me how to,
Yeah, but that one's different.
Yeah, and then that one is a whole nother level, And actually what was helpful is I had a friend who worked in like, she worked on a suicide hotline. And so I went to her because I was like, this is a good resource. I'm going to ask her about it. I was like, dude, what do I do about this? And she was like, well, first of all, I don't have like a great answer, but I will tell you, like, when someone is feeling like that, they're setting some sort of benchmark, or if I can just reach that benchmark, everything will be okay. And sometimes it's an impossible benchmark. It's something that they'll never have. And so somebody has said it as like, if I just form a friendship with this guy from this band, then everything will be okay. It's a fake thing. It's not going to be okay, even if you become friends with this person. You know what I mean? But it's also has much less to do with you. You don't need to feel the pressure of that at the same time. I thought that was really helpful because I think that pressure was like, it was getting to me, and it was hard. And so like the idea of, don't sink like a stone, put your own oxygen mask on before you help others. You have to protect yourself. You have to set like some healthy boundaries in your life.
How do you do that today? How do you prioritize your own mental health?
I'm really just focused on the music and the show. You know what I mean? It's kind of where I'm at.
Keeps you balanced.
Keeps you balanced. It's what most communicates with people, the best too. I don't get into the weeds on it. Like I don't read comments. You know what I mean? Like I just do our band was born in an era before comments, so it can exist in an era, without them as well. You know what I mean? Like I don't find them trustworthy also. Like, and I mean both ways. Somebody telling me that like Tim should run for president. He's the second coming of Jesus. You know what I mean? Or like, this guy's awful. You know what I mean? Like, I don't believe either one of them. You know what I mean? So it's like, they're not always helpful. Like, it's great to hear feedback from people for sure, but you have to like set some boundaries for yourself.
By the way, Black Crown's great.
Thank
you.
Mellow. Yeah. Andy Hull from Manchester Orchestra sings on that one.
Bursts into something big, dude. Very anthemic.
Yes. Yeah.
Great record.
Anthemic is, I think, something that we've had that box ticked.
Is it true that you do puzzles while you make music?
We did on this last record, that's for sure. It's funny because we were talking about how hard it is to like just stay present and stay focused. And so a lot of times we'd be in the studio listening to Katherine working with something very specific, like a snare tone, you know what I mean? Something that's tedious and you can very much get like kind of bored by it. And so when you get bored, you pick up your phone and like do whatever. And the phone is now taking you out of the process completely.
Totally.
You're no longer in the studio anymore. You're now like watching reels of like boats crashing into piers or something, you know what I mean? And so I remember thinking, I don't want to be on this phone. I can't listen to her do all these snare tones for 2 hours long either. It's so hard. I need something else to do. And I remember I was at Amoeba, and they were in the back of the store. They were selling puzzles. It was almost like the place you put the thing that doesn't sell right before you put it in the dumpster. It's so far back there. And there was a Metallica Master of Puppets puzzle, and I was like, oh, dude, this will be fun.
Yeah, I'll take that.
And so I brought it into the studio. I'm like, what are you doing? And I'm like, I'm just gonna do this puzzle. And next thing you know, like everyone's doing the puzzle, by the way, but now everyone's off their phones. You know what I mean?
Healthy.
Yeah, it was like we were able to like
Present.
and like we're focusing on creating the 50 crosses on a field of Master Puppets, but you're not like on different reels and like all these things, and we're listening to the music. And so it became like every Sunday I went to Amoeba and picked up we did a Master Puppets puzzle, we did a Hawkwind puzzle, which is kind of an inside joke in Rise Against. We did a Kill 'Em All puzzle. We borrowed a puzzle from Toby from H2O's wife. I think the studio is called Big Bad. It's over in Lincoln Heights. I think they said they were going to frame the Master of Puppets puzzle. I don't know if they ever did, so it was fun.
That's like, honestly, like hands active.
I
mind
recommend
active.
it. I recommend
good.
it. Anybody who's been in a studio knows that there are tedious and boring parts of it. So if you want to stay off your phone, it works.
Is Swing Life Away, is that just like, is that about not overthinking things?
Yeah, so when Swing was written, I was living in a punk house in the north side of Chicago with more roommates than rooms. You know what I mean? Everybody was sort of like working kind of menial jobs, but they all had their eyes set on something bigger. Everyone had kind of dreams, but those dreams weren't going to happen tomorrow. You know what I mean? We were still going to be broke. We were still going to try to figure out how to pay the gas bill. And we were still going to be living together. And I think that song was, in a rare moment of clarity, was appreciating that moment of my life. You know what I mean? Where this is cool. I know we are all broke. I know there's no promise of what tomorrow will look like. You know what I mean? But this is such a beautiful time in our lives. It's far more innocent than anything that we probably will ever experience again. That we're all just kind of like living here on this front porch, which we didn't have air conditioning, so the house was so hot in the in the summer, and so we spent a lot of time on the front porch. You know what I mean? It's kind of where we were the kind of house where we were just off the highway, so people coming into the city to go do whatever, they would stop at our house first just to say hi or stop on their way out of the city before they went home. And it was a really cool, eclectic group of people, and my song was kind of like a tribute to that. There's like lines in it like we get by just fine on minimum wage, like those kind of things. That's what we were doing. We had we had nothing, you know what I mean, except for just like dreams, as cheesy as that sounds, you know what I mean? And so that's kind of where that song came from. It was written outside of any idea of where it would end up. Like we were doing Rise Against, but at that point, I think punk and hardcore, it was so like, there were so many rules and guidelines. You can't write an acoustic song.
That's what I was wondering. Was it written not as acoustic song and you pulled it back?
It was written like just as me on a couch in this house one day, and then because I just couldn't not write it. You know what I mean? Just messing around on acoustic guitar. I recorded it on a 4-track with my friend Neil Hennessy, and I remember playing it for the guys. And their reaction was kind of my reaction was like, Tim, that's a great song, but we can't.
It's not us.
We can't do it. And I kind of agreed with them. You know what I mean? I didn't do it. I wasn't like proposing this be a Rise Against song. It was kind of like, I just wrote a cool song. I thought it was cool. Thought I'd show it to you guys. And then it was Fearless Records did a Punk Goes Acoustic compilation. They reached out to us and said, will you give us an acoustic version of one of your songs? And we were still in this mindset, no, you can't do an acoustic version of a Rise Against song. Like, this doesn't happen. But we wanted exposure too. This was a huge thing for us at the time. So they're like, wait, Tim, what about that thing you wrote and you recorded on a 4-track? What if we just sent them that? So that's what we did. We recorded it during our Revolutions Per Minute sessions, which was our second record, also in Fort Collins, Colorado, and first record in Fort Collins, Colorado. And we sent it to Fearless Records, and they put it out on their Punk Goes Acoustic compilation. And then it lived as a comp track for like a year or two, just kind of floating around. And then when we signed to DreamWorks, our A&R guy, Ron Handler, had heard the acoustic song, which we'd almost like orphaned. We kind of just like, that was just this moment for this acoustic comp That's why we did it, And he was like, that's a great song, dude. Like, you should put it on the record. You should re-record it and put it on your major label debut, And we agreed, and we did it, and it kind of changed our lives.
It's crazy. It's like Savior and Swing Life Away, 2 songs
know,
you weren't really
dude.
sold on.
This
and
is
they
why
both change your life.
This is why you should never trust me when picking songs, singles. I'd be a terrible A&R guy. Like I've obviously my compass is wrong somewhere.
Well, also, like I had no idea that like Punk Goes Acoustic existed for that long. Like those volumes and series have been going on in my opinion. Like now,
Are they still going
forever.
on?
I mean, they were a few years ago.
That's funny. I was actually just at my label yesterday, Loma Vista, which is part of Concord, and Fearless is in that building. And I was like thinking about like, oh yeah, I wonder if anybody even knows that they have the first version of Swing Life Away, like on this like comp, and it was kind of our first exposure, to that song.
Wild.
Yeah, it was a wild story. It was a little curveball in the Rise Against world, especially for people who may have thought they knew what we sounded like, or we do sound like, and then to maybe then hear that song. If that song was their introduction, they bought the record, it would have been like, oh, this whole thing doesn't, sound like Jackson Browne.
You got to listen to all of Rise Against music. It's waiting for you on Amazon Music. There's a link below. What are you thinking?
We covered a lot.
I really appreciate your time and hanging.
Oh, the pleasure's mine, you guys. Yeah, thank you for having me. Yeah.
Dude, anytime. This was a lot of fun.
Cool.
Really appreciate you.
Yeah.
Tim from Rise Against, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
That's great.